Hello everybody, I'm John McCoy, illustrator based in Cincinnati, Ohio. Welcome back. This is part 29 of Learning to Draw with Andrew Loomis' Fun with a Pencil. We're continuing on page 110 with light and shadow, and today we're kind of discussing a principle that was kind of talked about on page 109, but it's reversing the source of the light, or rather the angle of where the light's coming from. In this case, you see how the light source is behind the camera versus here, so versus the light coming from in front of the camera, or the basically I'm saying camera in terms of the viewing angle of the viewer, basically. This is a similar case that's happening here, where the light source is off camera behind us, looking, casting down on this character and creating a shadow. And the way we do that basically is we create a horizon line, and that horizon line is going to affect the proportions of the character that we're drawing. So if we draw like a base here, this character has somewhat of a vanishing point over here, and I'm just going to construct it as like a rectangular, a three-dimensional rectangle, and draw this little character here. So it doesn't have to be that tall. We can make it like he's drawn it, where we have the head of the character just below the horizon line here. This is the horizon line. And we have this little character standing here. Just kind of rough this guy in here. Put the feet there. And he looks like he's holding a balloon here. So that balloon is above the horizon line. Let's just kind of rough this guy in here. There's like some kind of a hat here, an outfit. It's a little kid, I guess, of sorts. He's holding a bag of something here. But you see, the point of drawing all of this is to talk about the light and shadow and how we're going to draw all of that, as opposed to drawing this character. So I'm not spending too much time here. We'll put a little mouth on him. And some cheeks here, just a little bit of definition to make it fun, and to just add some character to the character, I guess is what we'd say. But paying attention to our horizon line, he talks about just in case you must draw a shadow of a figure correctly on the ground plane. This is the ground plane. First, draw rectangles around the subject. They are drawn to the normal VP, so basically the vanishing points. But the character himself, as well as the rectangles that we'd be drawing around the character, go to the vanishing points and follow that. So he's drawn like these rectangles, almost as if you're bisecting the character, and then drawing this little rectangle around him. This will come in handy later when we're understanding how to project that onto the ground plane. So as you can see, I'm kind of eyeballing it. I'm not like, I haven't established the VPs. I'm not using a ruler and stuff like that. So the difference between what we were talking about for this technique he's giving us to draw the shadows in this way, where the light is off camera behind us, the difference between that and what we learned in the last video is that the source here, okay, so we have the source here, and the direction of light is below the source. But in this case, to draw this is a technique of drawing it. It creates a slightly different result. You'll see why, because in this case, the direction of light is directly perpendicular to the source. And that means that these lines are going to become further apart, as we talked about, when they cast through the object that's creating the shadow. In this case, it's kind of different, because you notice how these lines are converging towards the direction of light. So when the light is coming from this direction. So in terms of realism, these are principles, illustrative principles, to be able to draw shadows and to understand how we might be able to plan shadows out on the picture plane if we're illustrating a scene. But in reality, shadows can behave a little bit differently. And for our purposes, when we map this character onto there, you notice how, like, but the bottom line is, what I'm saying is that this form is converging towards a direction of light that's far away from it and not perpendicular to the light source. If the light source is off camera behind us, that line would drop down in front of this character and cast and would create the shadows converging out. vice versa in this case. But if you look at the image without all the construction lines, it's a very believable image with the shadows like so. So just having covered that point, the theory is somewhere off camera back here, in front of us, way off here, is the direction of light source, almost as if it was coming from our camera here. The light source, the ring light around our camera. But anyways, so that way, we just establish, we're basically just establishing a shadow. So we draw this vertical line here, which is going to include points for the direction of light as well as the angle of light. He's got the angle of light down here, and he's got the direction of light on the horizon line. And then from there, it's pretty simple. We're basically drawing that rectangle that we drew around the character to the direction of light like that. I'm not going to use a ruler because this is just for theory. But we mapped this rectangle out to that, and same thing if you wanted to project the whole thing. And now, more importantly than that, is going to be the angle of light for this balloon, because we don't really need to take it to the direction of light. He's not done that. We're taking it to the angle of light, like so, down there. And so if you do that, if you follow all those corners down, it's basically, if you look at it, you can draw the rectangle, continue the rectangle as if connected to the character here, giving us a little more space to work with as he's done. And then where that connects with there, you've seen where the shadow, basically the rectangle that we're going to be having, and the shadow of the balloon is going to be happening right here. Okay, and then the character may be you may think it's a little more complex, but it's not too bad. These are also going to go to the angle of light, like so. And so basically, by the time they get down there, wherever they intersect this line is where you're having the top of the character, and you're able to draw all of those features. If you were really to take it and you divide this for the head and then cast that to the angle of light, it's going to be intersecting here, and you can see very quickly how you can take it as far as you want, as far as detail and how thoroughly you're translating these lines and so forth. But for the sake of understanding how we can use this as an illustrative technique, it's pretty simple. We're basically projecting the shadow using this technique onto here, and we have that little hand holding the balloon. Very cool. So this hand is holding the balloon like so, going up there, so we have the little shadow. And so now you understand why, as an illustrative technique, why we weren't too concerned with the DL being here, DL being here, because in the end, when we finish this little drawing, we still have a wonderful little drawing which has a very believable shadow to it, and that was the purpose. So he's given us an illustrative technique to be able to draw this little character here and give it, most importantly, in this particular lesson, a shadow. A wonderful little shadow of this character holding the little balloon here like so. So, very nice, simple technique for understanding how we might construct a shadow. Now, of course, and the point of this too is that it's following, because this DL falls on the horizon line, that makes it even more believable because it's respecting the ground plane of our perspective, which this character falls onto this perspective grid. So it's respecting that. You know, you can eyeball this stuff or make it up. You can make a character, whatever it would be, if it's a sphere, and then try to just draw this shadow behind it. I mean, it's kind of the same thing, but in this case, this is just following this lesson and understanding how it breaks down is a great way to understand deeper how we might construct something like this. And this thing is pretty cool. This is really pretty beautiful. It's talking about artificial sources, but in reality, if you analyze this is the same thing that's happening, because picture this surface that this shape and this pipe are laying on as compared to this candle. Picture the candle as being the sun, and basically you have the same diagram here. This is the surface. This sign could be the pipe, or it could be the box that you're seeing, and the candle is standing really high above the earth. The DL falls perpendicular to the source, but really in the same sense, this is what's happening here because you have the source and then you have a perpendicular line DL hitting the ground plane, which would be the earth. And we can do that real quick. Draw that little scene out, because this is a really good way of understanding it too. So we have this candle, it's sitting on a surface, let's say a table. Draw little details like the wax dripping down the candle, kind of add some realism to it. You have the little wick, and then the source is the flame there. And basically you have a perpendicular line going straight down, and below that is your DL. So you've established a point on the ground, which is the DL. And then at any point you can go ahead and draw some other objects here, like, well, this could be a lighter. This could be a lighter, or the box that would represent a lighter. You just kind of eyeball this little scene in here. And then you have a pipe here lying like so on the table. For me, I'm using a slightly different angle of perspective than it appears that Loomis used in his drawing, which is okay. And then at this point, we have the source, the angle of light. Again, you're seeing the same triangle that was happening on page 108. This triangle, which has the angle of light, the direction of light, and the source. The same thing is basically happening here. You've got the DL, which is radiating out these, connecting with the edges of our objects, casting out like that. And the same with that one back there. And then you have the source, which is cutting through the same angles. And cutting down through here. And because of that source, you're going to get your projection of your shadows. So the shadow is going to come down through here, and the shadows come down through here. But really, with the rectangle, you have to pay a little more attention to where it's cutting through these lines, because that determines what your shadows are going to be like. The beauty of this is that this is just a technique for understanding how shadows work. And in reality, when you're studying from life or you're working and you have reference photos and stuff like that, you can see the angles. You don't have to make this stuff up. This is not as you were kind of like the video where we worked from a ground plane and we created a little scene from that. This can be done this way. You can artificially create shadows, but this to me seems more helpful for just theory, like understanding how does this work? Because you need to understand how these angles, the angle of light, for instance, how does that work? It makes sense that you have these, and why did shadows have these angles where they radiate out like that? And you can understand why, how far the shadow goes based off of how high the candle is. If the candle is higher, it would create a different, the higher it would get, the more cut the angles would be. If the light source was lower, it would obviously create vast shadows, which pretty much just blurred off and disappeared because they were really long shadows. So it helps to understand how these little angles coming down are important, basically. This shadow is going to be barely visible, if I'm correct here, because this angle is going to hit this little thing, and because of the height of this, you're barely going to see the shadow, which is photographically correct or visually correct, because if you study that, the smaller an object is, for instance, if I lay this pencil on here, I can see if I move my angle that there is a little tiny shadow behind this. But let's say if we put a larger object like this, you can see more of a shadow, and that's because of the height of it. So the same principle is happening with this pipe. This bulkier spot, this angle hits higher from off of the ground plane, which is this whole thing, and therefore it creates a more visible shadow, which is intuitive as well. You would say, of course, it's a larger object, so of course it's going to produce more shadow in that area, which makes total sense. Another thing that you would notice too, if this was a really bright source, is that the edges of the top of the candle would fall under the same principle. So that he kind of talks about it on this next page where we're not going to go into all this because it's actually the same thing as the candles. the candle and street lamp work on the identical procedure, as he says here. But you can see how the shadow created by the base of underneath the lamp is projected down. So the same thing would technically happen with this if the light is bright enough. The intensity of the light will create a sharper shadow. If the light's not very bright, it's going to make a softer shadow. But the same thing here, so you're going to end up with like somewhat of a shadow underneath the candle, depending on luminosity and all that stuff, like the different principles of light and how translucent this candle is, permitting light to go through the candle itself. But those are all different rules. The main principle we want to learn here is the angle of light, the direction of light, and the source, and how that creates this believable scene. But that's it for this video. I hope you guys have enjoyed watching this video and hope you've learned something. If you do, let me know in the comments what you learned, and we can create sort of a community here where other people can see in the comments what you learned, and maybe that's something that they learned. And at the same time, it helps me because when I see what you learned, I can think about that. That's something I might have learned as well in this video. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching. This is almost it for this series. We're going to have one more video on learning to draw with Andrew Loomis' Fun with a Pencil. It's been an excellent series. Can't wait to see you in the next video. Until next time, take care and God bless.